Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to another podcast for Islam for Europeans. Today we have a very special guest, Brother Ismail Kamdar, who's coming to us from South Africa. Is that correct, brother?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam rahmatullah. What city in South Africa?
So I'm based in Durban, South Africa, on the eastern coast. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Alhamdulillah.
Yeah.
I guess it's your summer there. How's the weather out there?
It's hot, but Durban is hot all year round. So this is the weather we are accustomed to. Yeah.
I see. Yeah. Well, here it's 0 degrees. So.
Wow. So we literally polar opposites at the moment.
Yeah, but I was walking around in like a light coat, so it was we're used to. I guess we're used to the winter weather here.
Yeah, you're used to the winter. We used to the heat. I can't stand cold weather.
Yeah, don't move to Canada.
No, thank you.
Okay, so our topic today, and I found your original lecture on YouTube. When I was looking up the concept of urf, and we'll since you've studied a lot on this subject, alhamdulillah, we'll let you sort of define the concept of urf more in detail. Sorry, I got to get my cat out of the way. Come on, kitty. Sorry. So but we'll get into that more. But I guess it's such a sort of like a important concept in fiqh in Islam, but at the same time, it's very unknown to most lay Muslims and even some educated Muslims. Like when I looked up urf in Islam on YouTube, the video with the most views was like 1,000. And we have all these other concepts in Islam that are just so taboo, hot topics that are always discussed: hijab, jihad, even inheritance, any topic you can think of, really. But urf is just the most least studied topic, least known topic in Islam. So, I wanted to talk about urf in general, but why do you think that is, Brother Ismail? Why do you think urf is such a unknown subject in the Muslim world?
Yeah, well, I'll extend it further and say urf is a subcategory of usul al-fiqh. And I think usul al-fiqh as a whole is one of the most understudied yet necessary subjects of our time. I mean, historically, usul al-fiqh was something that only the ulama studied and only the ulama discussed. But during the Ottoman era, it kind of like sidestepped it because we now had all these books of fatwa, and people began to just memorize the fatwa. And it's kind of like over the past 400 years, usul al-fiqh started getting less and less important, less and less discussed, until you could say within the past 100 years, it almost disappeared from public knowledge altogether, to a level that there are many people out there who are graduates in Islamic studies, yet they're unfamiliar with the usul al-fiqh, even of their own madhab. If you had to ask them, like, if you had to ask the average scholar, like I'm a Hanafi, right? So if you had to ask the average Hanafi what are the usul al-fiqh of the Hanafi madhab, they might not be able to give you the full list. Or maybe they'll be able to talk about Quran and Sunnah and Ijma', but you have to go further and ask them, what about urf? What about istihsan? What's the Hanafi approach to hadith? They may not be able to do so because sadly, these are neglected subjects in our time.
Mm-hmm.
And the irony here is these subjects were developed in the second and third generation of Islam to solve new issues as they pop up.
Mm-hmm.
That's why these subjects were developed, because the ulama of that period, like Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, rahimahullah, these great ulama, they had the foresight to see that in every generation, new things are going to pop up. So we need a system to solve new problems. That's essentially what usul al-fiqh is. It's a system for solving problems as they pop up. Now, what happened was we had this long period of history where nothing new popped up. There was like this stagnation period of history where basically life was the same for 600 or 700 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so because nothing's popping up, nobody's using usul al-fiqh. Because no one's using usul al-fiqh, people stop teaching usul al-fiqh or stop talking about usul al-fiqh. But then suddenly we have this surge of new things popping up. Say from World War I until now. Right? From World War I until now, the amount of new things that have popped up in the world, it's like something to a level that has never happened before in human history. It's just too much. And suddenly our ulama are not prepared to deal with new things because no one's studying usul al-fiqh, or if they are, they're studying it in terms of just memorizing the names without learning how to apply it to modern times. This is the other issue, right? Some institutes do teach it, but it's just like, this is the usul al-fiqh of the madhab, learn the names, learn the definitions, put it aside, right? But how to apply to our times, this is something that's it's a big issue nowadays. It's something that we need to revive. And one of the reasons I actually did that series, so that lecture on Urf was part of a series, was uh, how lost that topic is in our time. So this series actually took place in last year in October, exactly 1 year ago. And when I announced the series and I told my community I'm going to do a 6-part series on usul al-fiqh, the question I got from everybody, including my own family, is, "What's that?"
it, it kind of reminds me
And my family are generally knowledgeable people, but they've never heard of usul al-fiqh in their entire life.
yeah. I mean, you know, that's, and think about, you know, the general non-Muslim population. I mean, I think there's a big disconnect with what the Muslim community thinks non-Muslims already know about Islam. Like I remember when I was at the University of Toronto and they had an Islamic Awareness Week. And, you know, one of the booths was name the 6 principles of faith. You know, and as I was listening to hear, you know, non-Muslims walk by, they don't know, they said to themselves, I don't know one principle of faith, you know. So there, people are a lot of not even definitely a lot of non-Muslims don't understand these terms. So, you know, we really have to break it down and sort of define them. So you defined usul al-fiqh as applying Islamic knowledge to understanding new problems. Is that correct? Or
Yeah, so the actual technical definition of usul al-fiqh, so let's just break it down, right? Usul means your methodology,
okay,
right? The way of doing something. And fiqh means your understanding of the law. So your methodology of understanding or working out the law. That's
okay.
what usul al-fiqh is. So you get different methodologies, the Hanafi method, the Hanbali method, the Maliki. So basically, in the second generation of Islam, there were scholars in different cities who developed different ways of solving problems, right? So we had Imam Abu Hanifa in Iraq, we had Imam Malik in Medina, we had Imam Ash-Shafi'i who traveled to multiple countries, and each of them developed their own system of figuring out laws and applying Islamic principles to new issues. And these became known as madhabs, right? So the term madhab is is linked to the term usul al-fiqh. Your madhab represents the methodology you use for solving fiqh issues.
Okay.
And each of them developed a slightly different methodology that was united in primary issues and divisive in secondary issues. What do I mean by this is that, for example, Imam Malik, Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Ash-Shafi, all these early scholars, they all agreed our laws come primarily from Quran and Hadith, from the Quran and from the teachings of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam.
Okay.
After that, they had differences. So Imam Malik would look at the practices of the people of Medina and he would take laws from that. The others rejected this. Imam Abu Hanifa would use a lot of rational. So the Hanafi methodology is more rational in fiqh. So it's more about looking at the whys and the hows and the context. Right? That's why they became known as the people of opinion. Imam Ash-Shafi focused more on hadith. And so these became different ways of approaching fiqh that developed over time. And so different countries have different methodologies. So usul al-fiqh essentially means a way of approaching Islamic law to, number one, work it out, and number two, use it to figure out new things, because Islam's meant to be able to be applied to every time and place, but times and place keep changing.
Yeah.
How do we keep it relevant? That's what usul al-fiqh is there for. How do you keep the laws relevant? Somebody invents something new. How do we decide whether it is permissible or prohibited or recommended? Well, we use usul al-fiqh to figure that out, right? So this is what it is, a method of figuring out what is the law on anything.
Okay, so let's use a practical example, and this is big, you know, in Western media, and there's a book by a British professor. I don't want to name names, but he was talking about female circumcision, or FGM, and describing the experiences of a book that he read from someone who had apostated from Islam.
Right.
And really horrible experience. It was like type 4 FGM. But as far as I know, and then maybe you can elaborate on this, I don't know if you know about this particular subject, but when the different madhabs, when they addressed these issues, they said that it was only specific to a particular region. It's only not even the type of pharaonic horrible mutilation that women are experiencing in the Horn of Africa. And on top of that, it's not even obligatory. Now, when when Western scholars, when they look at what they think Muslims think about this particular subject, they just take one hadith out of context and they say, well, this justifies what's going on in those particular regions. And and when you look at even websites that are against this particular practice, they never mention what Islamic scholars have said about the subject. So how would the different madhabs look at this particular issue and then deduce what is allowed and what is not allowed?
Yeah, so one of the primary principles that you will find in usul al-fiqh across all madhabs is the principle of it's called la darar, or darar yudal, which translates as harm must be avoided.
Okay.
Right? And so one of the great Hanbali scholars, Ibn Qayyim, he said anything that causes harm, right, or oppression or injustice is not allowed by Islam, even if your understanding of hadith led you to think it's allowed.
Okay.
Right? Meaning our understanding of hadith is governed by the system of avoiding harm. So if your understanding of hadith is leading to a harmful practice, you have to look back and say, wait, maybe I'm not understanding the hadith properly. Right? I mean, so for example, this hadith about the female circumcision, what exactly was done? Do we know the details? How far did they go? Was it done in a harmful way, in an unharmful way? Did they have a way of doing things 1,400 years ago in Arabia that we don't even know about today? That was like completely different from what we call female circumcision today. So these are the questions you're going to have to ask before taking a hadith and just saying, okay, this is what Muslims follow. Because especially when it comes to hadith, there's a number of checks and balances that you have to put into place before you follow a hadith in fiqh. You have to look at firstly, how did the Sahaba, the first generation of Muslims, understand that hadith? Did they apply it? If they applied it, how did they apply it? What was the context of the hadith? The level of authenticity of the hadith? Are there other hadiths on the topic that contradict it, right? That may have came later on. You have to look at other things. Different madhabs may look at different things. So Imam Malik would look at, did the people of Medina follow this hadith? Because if the people of Medina did not follow a certain hadith, Imam Malik sometimes wouldn't follow it either.
Yeah.
Because he said, this, you remember Medina at his time were the children of the first generation of Muslims, right? They grew up, their parents were around the Prophet ﷺ, so he looked at their practice as Islam. Imam Abu Hanifa would actually go further, and Imam Abu Hanifa would say like, okay, if this hadith only comes to us from like one or two chain of narrators, and then we don't have to follow it in fiqh. It needs to have a lot of chain of narrators for us to follow it in fiqh. So we have all these different approaches. So the idea of someone just taking hadith and saying this is what Muslims believe, that's not fair. That's not a fair approach to take, because even with the very first generation of Islam, that's not how they followed hadith. Even with the Sahaba themselves, if somebody told a Sahabi, a first generation Muslim, that the Prophet ﷺ said this, they would look at it from different perspectives. They wouldn't just say, okay, he said it, so we're going to do it. I mean, even when he was alive, they would sometimes ask him, you said this, are you saying it part of Islam, or are you giving us your opinion? They would actually ask the Prophet like that, that is this an Islamic command, or is this just your personal opinion? So even a hadith on this topic, for example, hadith on this topic may not even fall into the category of an Islamic law, because they are, when it comes to worldly practices, a certain level of worldly practices, the Prophet ﷺ told us that you understand the world better than me, so I'm just giving you my view, but you don't have to take it, right? So for example, when it comes to things like, he said this in the context of farming, right? You don't have to take his opinion on farming because he's not a farmer, but also in the context of medication. So there are many hadiths saying that certain things are good for your health, certain things are cure, certain things are beneficial medically. Many ulama of the opinion you don't have to follow those hadiths, because the Prophet in that context is not talking from revelation, he's talking from the medical knowledge available at his time.
I see.
Right. So you have to look at all of that before you just say, okay, this is a hadith, this is what Muslims believe. It doesn't just work like that.
Yeah, no, you're right. Adding another layer to that is that, a lot of these, like, well, I don't want to say anti-Islam, but even, just the general Western voice of Western academics, even if they're not necessarily anti-Islam, is that they're taking the English translation of these hadiths as well. So even if, the hadith was true, like what exactly did he mean by female circumcision?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that
So
goes back to definitions, that the word could have meant something completely different 1,400 years ago compared to what's practiced in North Africa today. I
yeah,
mean,
but I'll be honest, like one of the challenges of the Muslim Ummah is going to be taking this great knowledge from our scholars and then disseminating that information to the general public. Because right now, I mean, let's be honest, you go on these anti-FGM websites and there's no quotes from any Islamic scholarship, and it might be a two-way street. Maybe they're like, we don't want to listen to Islamic scholars, but
mm,
that's something even just for our knowledge, because like the more we say, oh, these people are just Islamophobes, don't even talk about the subject. Our youth, they're going to look at that and go, well, what does Islam really say about that? Where can I get this information? I mean, you can literally go on all these different websites that talk about, FGM and how it's practiced in Muslim countries, but to actually dig and find what our ulama are actually saying about it, that takes a little bit more digging. I know that
yeah.
this is kind of a this is kind of a tangent, so I want to get back on track. But I think it was important for us to understand a practical example. But let's
Mhm.
talk about urf. So the standard definition, Western definition of culture
Yeah.
is. Let me bring this up. I brought it up on Wikipedia beforehand, and I want to just see like how that compares to. Oh, where was I? The concept of urf in Islam, just to make sure that we're not okay. So the way the psychology community defines culture is learned patterns of perception, values, and behaviors shared by a group of people that are dynamic and heterogeneous. It's an umbrella term which encompasses the social behavior and norms found in human societies, as well as the knowledge, beliefs, arts, customs, capabilities, and habits of the individuals in these groups. So would urf be similar to that, or how would it be a little bit different?
Yeah. So Ulf, well, Ulf really wouldn't focus on beliefs. It will focus more on practices, right? Because in Islam, we unified in our beliefs.
Mhm.
This is the thing, right? So this is the unifying factor of Muslims across the globe. You mentioned earlier the six pillars of faith. That's standard in every Muslim culture. That's like there's not going to be different urfs when it comes to the pillars of faith. So what the actual legal definition of urf is: the established practices, words, doing, actions, and non-actions of people, right? So it's basically limited to what we say and what we do. This is what urf is. Uh, so I think one of the big differences is that when Western academics talk about culture, they also talk about beliefs,
Mhm.
right? But for us, beliefs fall into the realm of Aqidah, into the realm of theology. When we're talking about urf, we're talking about, well, to put this into context, in Islam, we have, Islam is very compartmentalized like this. So we have to like break it down and discuss the different compartments. Um, so we have our beliefs and we have our laws, our Aqidah and our fiqh. The fiqh is divided into ibadat and mu'amalat, acts of worship and social dealings.
Okay.
Applies to our social dealings. Meaning, in Islam, social dealings are very much left up to cultural interpretation. What do we mean by social dealings? Marital issues, family issues, business issues, matters of what you wear, what you eat, these kind of things. So let me just give a definition and give a few examples so that the average listener who may have never heard this term before knows what we're talking about. That the word urf means in the context of usul al-fiqh, the word urf means that on those issues where Islam is silent, this is the important part, those issues where Islam is silent, the scholars can base the rulings on the local culture, right? So on issues where the Quran and the Hadith does not have any direct reference, so the Quran and Hadith doesn't say do this or don't do this. In those areas, The scholars of a locality will base the ruling on the local culture. And in this way, Islam adapts itself to every culture in every part of the world. It goes back to the question: is Islam monocultural, or is it a plurality of cultures? And the answer is Islam accommodates the good of every culture, because Islam is meant to be practiced in every place and every time. And so it accommodates the good of all cultures. And just to give you some examples of this in classical fiqh, in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about husband and wife relations. وَعَاشِرُوهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. Treat your wife well according to your culture. This is one of the interpretations of this verse. And what the scholars have said is the Quran doesn't define how much money you should give your wife. It doesn't define what kind of house you should get for her. It doesn't define how you talk to each other, what terms you use for addressing each other. Uh, the day-to-day interactions, like how does a wife expect a husband to talk to her? How does a husband expect his wife to talk to him? What roles are going to play in the household? Some of it is set in the Quran, but most of it is not. Why? Because in this area, Allah, out of His mercy, had left things open to culture, left things open to culture. So you will find that as long as you are treating your wife well according to the people around you, you are considered a good husband in Islam. And that will be radically different in the USA compared to Saudi Arabia, compared to Pakistan, compared to Malaysia, compared to Turkey. Each country will have a different standard in what's expected from the husband and wife in the treatment of each other, in terms of the rights, upon, even the very rights upon each other. So things like, is the wife obligated to cook? This is left up to Urf. I mean, are you in a culture where women are expected to cook or not? That's what's going to define it. Uh, is the man expected to hire a domestic worker to clean the house twice a week, or 5 times a week, or not at all? There's no such concept. All of this is not mentioned in our books. All of this is just left up to the culture. And so when it comes to the husband and wife relationship, a large portion of it is cultural. And so you will find it very different from land to land. Another example of urf historically would be the way we dress, right? And this is something that gets lost in our times. This is really an area where it gets lost in our times. The Quran and the Hadith, or really the Hadith, when it comes to how, let's look at men, right, for a less controversial example. Uh, they generally get say the man has to cover from his navel to his knees, right? This is like standard, navel to knees. Uh, why do we cover our upper bodies? I mean, why are you not shirtless right now?
Modesty.
It's urf.
Yeah.
It's urf. It's our culture. I mean, in our culture, guys don't walk around with their shirts uncovered.
Right.
If we were living in India on a farm 700 years ago, we wouldn't even think about covering our upper bodies. We'd say, like, it's not my aura, I don't need to cover it. Because in that culture at that time, men never covered their upper bodies. And it was fine because their aura is still covered. Their private area in Islam is still covered. So just the fact that we cover our upper bodies is a show of how urf has just become a part of us. Like we wouldn't think about going out or doing a podcast with bare chest. I mean, we will end up going viral for the wrong reasons.
I remember when I first converted to Islam, Ismail, I played a lot of tennis. It was actually the only sport I was good at. So, when I converted, people were telling me like, you have to have your knees covered, and your prayer is going to be invalid if you pray with your knees uncovered. So I went and bought out these clam diggers that went, below the knees and everything. And everyone was calling me Nadal, because Rafael Nadal, as you know, was known for wearing the long shorts that covered the knees. So, so I was able to adapt
Yeah.
that specific aspect of Islam to the culture. But just anyway,
actually a very important part of urf there is that when Islam comes to a new culture, what's expected is that it takes the good of that culture and absorbs it, and it rejects the bad of that culture.
Okay.
So it's not a matter of a radical change. It's a matter of just letting go of the bad. So for example, if someone's in a culture where drinking alcohol is normal, when you convert to Islam, you have to give up that part of your culture, right? But if someone's in a culture where you expect it to be romantic to your wife, well, when you convert to Islam, you're still going to be romantic with your wife. Right? Believe it or not all cultures have the concept of romance. It's actually a culturally specific thing. I mean, because we living in the age of Hollywood, we think it's all over the world, but it's actually a very culturally specific thing. In some cultures, the concept of romance doesn't exist at all.
Mhm.
You know, husband and wife relationships are very serious uh, thing. So you know, sometimes we don't realize this, that when it comes to culture, all Islam asks you to give up is those aspects of your culture that are either haram or harmful. And
Okay.
of course, anything that harmful is by default either close to haram or haram. Right?
Right.
So that's really what culture comes into play.
Okay. Now, I think part of the reason why this is such a not very well known subject is that even in English translations of the Quran, like I looked up the ayat when you talked about urf.
Mm,
The other one is Surat al-Araf, ayah 199, where the English translation is hold to forgiveness, command what is right, but turn away from the ignorant. There's no mention of culture
mm,
in that ayah. So
yeah.
um, what you're saying is the root word of urf, that the scholars have said that this actually applies to the culture. So it's a lot more deep. It's much,
Yeah,
much
you
deeper
see,
than that.
what we're looking at here is the difference between translation and tafsir,
Yeah.
the difference between a translation and interpretation. And
Even
that's
in the
why,
tafsir. Even in
yeah.
the
No,
tafsir, like I read
actually,
the tafsir doesn't say anything about culture or urf.
well, it depends which tafsir you
Ah, I
read.
see.
Unfortunately, the ones that mention it are all in Arabic. I can
Right.
actually pull out a few from the shelf behind me. I guarantee you at least two of those talk about urf when it comes to those verses.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges will be having because you said this didn't come up until recently.
It didn't,
So
yeah.
one of the challenges will be from Islamic scholarship is disseminating this information to the general
Mm.
public, and if it's only in
It's
Arabic,
a big challenge. It's a big challenge. It's a challenge I'm dealing with on a daily basis in my life because people just don't understand. And let me explain historically why it didn't come up until recently, right?
okay,
Because for the bulk of human history, people lived in monocultural areas and they were cut off from the rest of the world.
yeah,
So if you grew up in India 300 years ago, by default, that's the only culture you know.
yeah,
Everybody practices Islam the same way you do, right? And the only people who are aware of cultural differences are those who actually travel, like Ibn
travel,
Battuta and Awliya Shalabi and people like that,
and it was by
right?
foot, and it was on foot. It wasn't like you could
Yeah,
take a
and it'll
plane,
take years for the message to reach the rest of your village. Hold
right?
on, this guy saw a country where Islam's practiced differently from us, right?
Yeah,
But what happens in the 20th and 21st centuries? Number one, Muslims are now all over the globe
yeah,
in new cultures. For the first time in centuries, we are in new cultures. South Africa, Canada, USA, these are completely new cultures for Muslims to be in. Number two is we interacting with each other. I mean, until 20 years ago, this kind of conversation between you and me across the globe wasn't possible,
no,
except maybe by by mail or something, right? So the idea of cultural interactions like this on such a global scale were impossible. So like when I was growing up, we only knew Indian Islam. We didn't even know Arab Islam. Forget any other culture. Like for us, Arab Islam was like a foreign concept. Like why these guys are doing this? Why they praying Salah differently? Why they're treating the wives like that? And like, we couldn't grasp the differences between their culture and ours because Indian Islam is all we knew. And the internet, global travel, migration, and also don't forget that in the past 50 years, there has been a surge in conversion. There have been a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds who have converted to Islam. And all these things put together, plus the fact that for the first time ever, we are living in multicultural societies. This maybe historically Baghdad or Andalus were multicultural, but most lands were not.
hmm,
Right? Most lands were you have even today if you go to Turkey or Malaysia today they have like one culture for the whole country and everyone's culture is the same, but if you come to South Africa, every neighborhood has a different culture,
wow,
and America is similar, right? So because in South Africa we have like more than 10 different races, more than 20 different languages, uh, we have a lot of different economic classes, and so there are literally cultural differences from one neighborhood to the next.
hmm,
And so these create a whole lot of new challenges that nobody thought about before. So
hmm,
100 years ago, it was easy to memorize a book of fatwa, of opinions that came out from India and to just follow it because it still applied to you. But now, 100 years later, someone's in South Africa, someone's in Canada, they're trying to apply the Indian book of fatwa written 300 years ago, and it's not making sense because those books have things like women shouldn't go to school. The things that have those books have things like you have to dress in Indian attire.
Mm.
So you're reading these things and you're like, okay, how am I supposed to do all this in Canada? How am I supposed to do all this in South Africa? You're not. The
Yeah.
ulama of that time made the rules for their time based on the issues of their time. They didn't think somebody 200 years later is going to be trying to apply it in a foreign land. That wasn't their intention, right? Their opinions, as strange as they seem to us, were valid for their time and place,
Right.
right? It was valid for the situation they were in at that time and that place. They had reasons for what they said, and it makes sense if we were alive in that time and place. But now to
But
take it 100 years later and apply it's bizarre. It's really bizarre.
okay, so let's even still though, from what I've read in Islamic history, we still see vignettes and stories of the Sahaba in the first three generations um, going to a new land.
Mhm.
And they did, correct me if I'm wrong, but they did a few of these things. One is that whenever they went to a new land, the Muslims who came from that land were quote unquote leading the charge of dawah because they knew their society, they knew their language, and things like that. So that's one thing. Another thing is that they adapted to the culture when they moved there. So what evidences can we see, not just from the Quran, but also the Sirah, the stories of the first three generations of Muslims, um, that we can draw from as evidence that this is the best way forward for the Muslim community in the 21st century?
Okay, so to me, the best example of this was the Muslims' conquest of Syria, right, or Asham. So Syria today is not what Asham was. Asham was actually what's Lebanon, Palestine, Syria, all these lands put together. It was one country
Mm.
historically until World War One. So when the Sahaba, the first generation of Muslims, conquered Syria and migrated there, a lot of cultural changes took place. To understand, uh, Syria before that was a Byzantium country, right? It was ruled by the Byzantium Roman Empire. It was Arab, but these were Byzantium Christian Arabs. So the culture was very different from that of Makkah and Medina, which were more tribal, more simple, right? So you see a big difference in this. In that, for example, when Umar ibn al-Khattab travels from Medina to Syria to visit the Sahaba, he made a comment and he said, "Everybody's changed."
Mm.
This was his comment. Everybody's changed. Like you're dressing differently, you're living differently. I can't recognize it. I can't recognize the way people are living. And there's a couple of stories about this. But the one that really, for me, hits home here and really drives this point home is when he had appointed Muawiyah radiallahu anhu as the governor of Syria, and Muawiyah began to live like a king.
Mm.
Right? He eventually became the first king of the
Yeah.
Umayyad dynasty. But in the time of Umar, as the ruler of the Syria, he's starting to live like a king. And Umar himself is living a very simple lifestyle. It's a big contrast that the Khalif is living a simple lifestyle and the governor is living like a king. So Umar asked him, why are you living like this? So, and he gave a very profound answer. He said that the people of Syria are accustomed to being ruled by the Byzantium kings.
Mhm.
When they see a ruler who dresses like this, who lives like this, who has this lifestyle, they respect him, they look up to him because this is their culture, right? And so he understood the culture of his people, he adapted to their culture, and he began to live like them. And Umar let it go. He didn't say anything. He didn't technically approve of it, but he didn't dismiss him from the post or correct him either. So it was like a silent approval. And Muawiyah ends up becoming so powerful in Syria that he rules it for 40 years, and his family ruled it for over 100 years, right? How did he establish that level of loyalty and that level of power in a foreign land? Because remember, he is from a Arab tribe from Makkah, and we find that all of Syria were loyal to him even during the civil war against other Sahaba. How did he establish that level of loyalty? I know a lot of people don't like to talk about this aspect of history because it's a very touchy and emotional topic about the Civil War. But there are lessons we can draw from it, and this is one of the lessons that I always try to figure out: how did he get the loyalty of people? Because this is a foreign land, right? The way he got their loyalty was adapting to their culture. That he understood the culture of Syria and he began to live like a Syrian. He began to dress like one, live in a house like theirs, live like how they expect their leaders to live, treat them the way they expect their leaders to treat them. And he also established justice. Obviously, if you can't you can't have a lawyer as a leader, you can't have loyalty without justice, right? But the fact is, he assimilated into their culture. And because he assimilated into the culture, that land became loyal to him. And he wasn't the only one who did this, right? All of the Sahaba that lived in Syria, Umar ibn al-Khattab commented that they are dressing very differently from how they used to dress in Medina. So
Okay.
this shows that all of them had adapted to the culture. They began to dress like Syrians, not like Makkans.
Okay. So
So
that
that's one
that
of the clear examples
oh,
of this, yeah.
yeah. Okay. No, no, that makes a lot of sense. And that's definitely, I guess he assessed, what the people would, find attractive or unattractive in terms of, finding Islam as compatible with their culture. But if we look at it from another angle, because now we're dealing with the 21st century,
Mm,
we have mosques nowadays, in 2020, where it's smack dab in the middle of a town that's 90% white and 5% black, and all of the congregants wear South Asian clothing, and all of their lectures are in Urdu, and it's a boarding school. So it's just a completely different culture in a totally different town. And we can tell them, like, this isn't the way to do things. You should adapt to the culture all we want. But at the end of the day, they're not going to change, even if the imams want to, because the parents who paid for their kids to go to these boarding schools, they're expecting, to be immersed in the South Asian culture. So
mm,
the other, that's option A, is to assimilate into the local culture. But the other option that we're advocating for, which is probably a lot more feasible, is that, okay, you're here, you can keep your culture, don't change anything about yourself, keep the dress, keep everything. But for those who actually convert to the faith, to help, you should help them keep everything in their culture, which is difficult to do, because even if you're just, even as a sole convert, you kind of have to do as the Romans do, and you're going to be eating biryani for iftar. You're going to be, some of them will dress the way that they dress.
mm.
So I guess that's one of the challenges living in the 21st century. So how do you think that that's a more feasible approach for this type of dynamic?
Look, from my study of history, I actually see things going very differently.
Okay.
What I see is going to happen is that by the third or fourth generation of these immigrants, there is going to be a culture clash or a culture war between parent and child. This is what's going to happen.
Mm,
The father is going to say you need to dress in Southeast Asian clothing,
yeah.
and the son's going to say that's not my culture.
Mm,
And then this is going to take place. And what's going to happen is now when that child grows up, he's going to be raising his children upon Western culture,
mm,
right? And then this is naturally the direction that masjid will head in, because now the majority of elders are now third generation, fourth generation born Americans, right? So the way I look at it is trying to force a culture change never works. Historically, culture changes happen gradually and they happen intergenerationally. So you will have the first generation who are all about preserving the back home culture. And they're going to be that, and there's nothing you can do to talk about of it. That it's just not possible. I've never seen it work, even here in South Africa. Someone comes from another country, they are going to do everything possible to preserve whatever link they have back home. But guess what? I'm fifth generation in South Africa. I don't know my native language. My mother doesn't know my native language. My grandparents were the last ones to speak it. The third
mm,
generation were the last ones to speak it.
mm,
We are English speaking. This is our mother tongue. Our now this is our primary language. Because we are fifth generation in this country, English is the only language we speak. That same thing is going to happen in America by the fifth generation as well.
okay.
So the cultural change on their side is going to come gradually. But it's not going to come easily, because there will be a generation where there's going to be a culture clash and a culture war. And I think that's what's happening at the very moment in America. Because you are seeing this now, where the younger generation are asking their parents, but why can't they celebrate birthdays?
Mm,
But why can't we have anniversaries? This is just our culture. Why I've got to dress like that? That's not our culture. So these questions are coming up. And what that means is that this culture clash for the immigrants is happening now. So fast forward to 2030 or 2040, the masjid is going to look very different,
mm,
because now that generation are going to be the adults. They're going to be the board of directors. They're going to be in charge of the school. They're going to be the one paying the fees, and they're going to want things to be according to their culture, which is no longer the immigrant culture. It's now the culture they grew up in. right? So this is the gradual natural change. The other side of it is, okay, in the meanwhile, over the next 30 years or the next 20 years, while this is happening, uh, how then do we help people who convert to Islam and feel out of place?
Yeah.
Because this happens in South Africa as well. It happens a lot in South Africa. But
Yeah.
again, we have so many different cultures here.
Yeah, let's take a practical example like the Zulu, like or the
Yeah.
Xhosa, like there. What would you see as an ideal way forward in giving us, giving Islam to them and helping the converts establish their communities there?
Look, with the local tribes like the Zulu and the Xhosas, initially, about 20 years ago, there was a lot of resistance to the Dawah because it was seen as Indians preaching an Indian religion to Africans, right?
Mm.
That's what it was perceived as. And again, literally there was this idea that if someone converted to Islam, they had to start wearing Southeast East Asian dress. They had to learn Urdu. They had to start eating spicy food. So
Yeah,
it was converting cultures.
yeah.
That's changed. It has changed gradually over the past 20 years. Why it has changed? It has changed for, I would say, about three or four reasons. Number one, I think our generation are a lot more knowledgeable about these things than 20 years ago. Number two, a lot of people from their culture who converted ended up becoming the ones who spread the message in their cultures, right? It's like
Mm.
like, like one of my very close friends, he converted to Islam when he was 9 years old. So he's from a Zulu tribe and his father's a priest. And he converted to Islam and he became a scholar of Islam. And so he's the one doing dawah to the Zulus. I don't, because I feel like there's always a barrier. There's always a cultural barrier in the dawah. I mean, I would if the situation pops up. If someone
Mm.
asks me about Islam, I'm going to tell them. But I don't go out there trying to force my opinions upon them. The guy out there doing it are the Zulu converts, it is the Xhosa converts, and they have also what they did is they established their own masjids, their own mosques in these areas. So in an area where there are no Indians, you will find a mosque run by Zulu imams, where the lectures are in Zulu, where there's Zulu translations of the Quran, where all of this is taking place. And so what we're seeing now is an influx of converts compared to
Yeah.
20 years ago, to such an extent that the local mosque that I go to, 20 years ago, 90% of the congregation was Indian. Now it's about 50% is Indian,
Mm.
right? It's a mixture of all different races. Like when you walk in, there are Turkish people. Firstly, there's a lot of immigrants to the country, so there's people there from Turkey and Egypt and Malawi, but there's also a lot of locals. There's whites, there's Zulus, there's Xhosas, there's everybody in one masjid. And because the crowd is diversifying, the lectures are not in Urdu anymore. The lectures are in English. A couple of times the lectures were in Zulu,
Mm.
right? Because you now have to cater to a variety of different of people. So this is what I mean by gradual change. And this is what happened is that first generation that converted, they faced a lot of difficulties. I know, I mean, if you listen to their stories, they faced a lot of difficulties. People tried to Indianize them and they tried to get them to dress like Indians and change their names and change their surnames, and all of this was going on. And they resisted that and they just converted to Islam and they learned Islam, and some of them became scholars of Islam, and they're the ones now doing dawah to their communities. And this is now when you're beginning to see the influx of conversions.
Yeah, no, no, absolutely. I mean, it's kind of taking a homegrown approach, building a convert community from a particular culture from the ground up, and that's why we saw such a huge mass conversion to Islam among the African Americans in the United States. It was the largest mass conversion to Islam in the last couple hundred years, really. But over time, well, I don't want to get into details, but they had trouble keeping their culture when it was kind of like this. I'm not going to name names, but kind of a foreign dawa that came in with an influx of immigration, and that caused a
Mm.
lot of friction between the families. So
I know exactly what you're talking about.
yeah, we're not going to name names
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah.
So again, and that seems like a much more a natural approach. And I think what we see in a lot of cosmopolitan cities like Toronto is that a lot of these mosques are run by a single ethnicity.
Mhm.
Um, you have mosques that are run by Pakistanis, you have mosques that are run by Somalis, you have mosques that are run by Arabs, They even have their own organizations. Like even in mid-level cities in Canada, you have Somalis have their own organizations, Syrians have their own organizations, but they still have the umbrella mosque in those cities where all the congregants go. And it's not like these quote unquote ethnic masjids disallow any Muslims from coming in. So when I first converted, we were totally against this idea. Like, oh, why do we have these cultural mosques that just cater to one ethnicity, where it's in one language? But now that I'm a little bit older, I'm a little bit wiser, I really see the utility in that, because we're being bombarded by this global monoculture, and people just want to hang on to something of their culture that's not commodifiable. And my opinion of the cultural, quote unquote, cultural mosques has really warmed in the last couple of years, because for converts, we're trying to allay the fears of our family and community members, and a lot of them are terrified of going to a mosque, even if they have a neutral or positive image of Islam. And these cultural communities, like you said, the mosque run by Zulus, is, I think, an important way to bridge that gap that a lot of Muslims don't realize. Did you have anything to add to that, or?
Yeah, no, I actually had the same evolution of thought as you on this topic. That a few years ago, someone told me in Canada. So they're actually talking about the experience in Canada. Like they spoke very angrily about the experience in Canada. They told me, in Canada you get Arab mosques, you get Indian mosques, you get Pakistani mosques. Why is there all this racism in Canada? And I was thinking about it, and I was talking to someone about it, and that person got me thinking. They said it's not racism.
No.
It's about comfort.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what it is. It's about making yourself comfortable. That think about it. A group of Indian families move to a foreign land. They're scared. They need to interact with each other. They need to be there for each other. They need to be able to help each other assimilate into this new land. And so the only way they can think of doing so is having a base, a place where they can meet up and where they can talk and where they can be with each other, because they could be working in companies where they never see each other. One guy is in the IT field, someone else is a doctor, someone else is a taxi driver. The masjid is the only place where they meet up, say, oh, I'm not the only one going through the struggle of being an immigrant in a new land. Yes, somebody else going through the same thing. And there is a fear of losing one's culture, because especially for Muslims, there is a lot of fear of Western culture.
Yeah.
Right? Because when we think of Western culture, especially if you come from a more conservative land, you're thinking about alcohol, you're thinking about fornication, you're thinking about your children getting caught up in all of this. And there is this fear that if we lose our culture, then our kids are going to do all of this. That's the fear that's in their mind. You have to understand where they're coming from. That if we lose our culture, our kids are going to involve all of this.
No.
And that's where the concept of urf actually comes in. That hold on, okay, we're in a new land, let's apply urf, meaning let's analyze the culture around us, take the good and leave the bad. So we begin to fit in without compromising our faith. That's what needs to happen now with this generation. And that's going to happen through education. It's the role of the ulama to step in and let people know, okay, listen, we are here. This is the new culture we are living in. We need to fit into the culture without compromising our faith. This is what we can do. This is what we can't do, right? So maybe we can celebrate anniversaries. We can't celebrate Christmas. Things like that. They have to have the discussion. I'm not giving fatwas by them. I'm giving examples before someone attacks me in the comments. Right? It's just examples of the conversations people are going to have.
Yeah.
The idea here is that the ulama now have to step up. And I know I've never seen that posted a few days ago on Twitter, that ulama of our generation can't afford to be just memorizers of books. We have to be deep thinkers, because we are facing new problems and new issues that our teachers didn't face and their teachers didn't face.
Yeah.
Right? This is a whole new world that's we're dealing with.
No,
so
and
it requires a new approach.
no, and the statement that came out a couple of weeks ago that sort of drove home this whole fear of Western culture was Macron's statements about a French, quote unquote, French Islam. So in his eyes, a French Islam is one that's secularized, that conforms to the French secular concept. But when I thought in my head, when I think of French Islam, though, I think of French people who've converted to Islam, forming sub-communities and keeping everything about themselves, but just not doing the things that are haram. And, we have to get past this, because like you said, it's a very controversial subject, and people in the Muslim community, some of them are going to balk at this idea, because they're thinking that, okay, we're adapting to a haram culture. And this didn't just happen with, the recent Muslim communities, but this also happened with Europeans. When when our ancestors, moved into Western lands, into the diaspora, and then, with the global American monoculture, we lost all of our cultural aspects. So, the Italian culture died out, the Portuguese culture died out for the most part, the Italian culture, the French culture, the British culture, it all got subsumed into this, globalistic white monoculture that sort of encompassed like, Western imperialism. So it's totally understandable why the Muslim community would balk at such an idea. But really, what we're talking about is just dropping the bad aspects of the culture.
Yeah, again, when we talk about this, most people, the issue that they actually have is that they don't know firstly what we're talking about, and their idea and our idea is different. So, for example, the word American Islam. When I say American Islam, I may be thinking one thing, the person listening may be thinking something completely different. So I'm thinking of a Muslim American practicing Islam, right? And they thinking, oh, he's talking about a Muslim who is LGBT and who is drinking alcohol and who's fornicating. That's not what I'm talking about. That's not what I'm thinking about. That's not even a consideration, right? But because I think one of the issues is, number one, we don't explain ourselves well enough. This is why we need to have long discussions. This is why tweets don't work, right? And this is why 5-minute clips don't work. We
Mhm.
need long, detailed discussions like this. That's why I prefer to teach a 6 weeks course rather than make a tweet about this topic, because we need to explain ourselves properly. And number two, we have to revive the sciences in our time. Uh, the average Muslim who moved to these lands has no clue about this.
Mm.
What they grew up with in their culture back home, they don't know the difference between what's culture and what's Islam. They don't, right? If someone is moving, just say someone's family has been in, I'm giving India as an example because that's where my ancestors come from, not for any other reason. So just say that my ancestors were in India as Muslims for 400 or 500 years. And so they're growing up in that culture and they're growing up with Islam. And the average person doesn't know the difference between what's Indian culture and what's Islam. So when they come to South Africa, they are preaching all of that as Islam, right? So for example, there are still segments of my community in South Africa, a large segment, who believe that dressing in Indian clothing is Islamic dressing. They call it Islamic dressing. And they call this Farsic dressing, dressing like an open sinner, right? Because in their mind, Indian dressing is Islamic and Western dressing is the way of the kuffar, right? This is the actual idea they have in their
Yeah,
mind
unfortunately.
because they have not studied the concept of urf.
Mm.
And so they are unable to differentiate between their religion and their culture, right? So they think, for example, when you get married, a Mendi party is part of Islam. A Mendi party is Indian culture. It's completely permissible Indian culture,
Yeah.
but it's not part of Islam. I mean, if somebody comes to Africa and they say, we're not having Mendi parties anymore, we're going to have something else instead, right? That's still perfectly fine because this is a cultural area where Islam has no law except don't do something haram. That's the only law here. Right? No bachelor parties, things like that, where there's something haram taking place. But whatever else you have leading up to the wedding, as long as it's not haram, it's fine. Whether it's a Mendi party or whatever it is your culture dictates. So here the problem is that people move to these lands, they bring their religion and their culture, and they don't know the difference between what's religion and culture.
Yeah.
And so when somebody in that land converts to Islam, they enforce their culture on that person in the name of Islam. So what happens in South Africa is someone who is Zulu converts to Islam, and people tell them you've got to start dressing in Southeast Asian dressing. Why? Because that's Islamic dress. You have to start wearing Islamic dressing. That's not Islamic dressing. That's cultural dressing,
Yeah.
right? And so this pushes people away. I've actually met many people who, they actually put them off taking the Shahada. It put them off converting to Islam. The idea that they have to let go of their culture and start basically living like Indians, right? So it's a big challenge, and we don't have a solution for it yet because even here in South Africa, there is no solution yet. There's still a huge resistance from a large portion of society who think that people like me are liberals and modernists trying to change the religion, while in reality, we're just trying to apply the usul al-fiqh and keep the religion as Allah intended it to be.
Mm.
But because they don't understand that, we get bashed with these titles of being liberals and modernists and Westerners and whatever else.
Hmm. Yeah. So it's going to be a huge challenge going forward. I don't. here in Canada, a couple of years ago, we had a show called Little Mosque on the Prairie, and it was about a Muslim
Yeah.
community in a small. I don't know if you've seen it before. Did you get a chance
Yeah,
to see
my
it?
kids watch that show so many times. I think I memorized it.
Yeah, so they were trying to adapt to living in a small town in Saskatchewan, and I remember the one episode where there was a big kerfuffle over should we have a barrier between the men's and the women's section in the mosque. And at the end of the episode, they what they did was they brought up hockey boards. They had like old hockey boards, and they had that end up being the partition, so at least the women could see what was going on. So on one part, it was kind of like interlaid with this whole controversial discussion, was like this adaptation of Canadian culture into the mosque itself. So you see these little kind of converts sort of trying to adapt their culture, trying to bring in something from their culture into the Muslim community. And this goes with cuisine. Like, I remember, and we have this big movement with Islam in Spanish. The Latino community in the United States is converting. A lot of them are converting to Islam, and they're starting to have the Latino Mexican iftars, which South Asians
Sounds
took to very.
delicious.
South Asians took to very kindly because of how spicy it was.
Yeah.
But they have a cultural connection with Andalus and everything. So for them, it's been a long go forward. But I guess for us, it's much more controversial because of the history between the Muslim world and Europe. So that's definitely one of the challenges. And going forward, I guess what European descendant converts, we kind of really did a disservice by sort of assimilating into another Muslim culture, because it just seems so off-putting to our families. And one of our responsibilities is that the people amongst our groups who don't like Muslims, among our friends and family, those are the ones that we have the most intimate relationship with, and it's kind of our responsibility to show them that Islam is adaptable to our culture. And I think by and large we haven't been doing that, because even though the Muslim community has been telling us, keep everything about yourself, just just drop the things that are haram, that is difficult to do when you're the only white convert in the mosque, and you're marrying into another culture as well. You sort of lose that completely. So going into that, let's talk about a subject that's even a little bit more spicy, and that is the issue of kafa'ah. Now, what is your understanding of, and then we can edit this out afterwards if you find it too controversial, but
No, this is a conversation that needs to be had.
no. Do you think, explain, okay, I guess even from
Explain
the
what
Hanafi,
it is first, I guess.
what it is. Go ahead.
Yeah, so kafa'ah is a concept found in all madhabs, but specifically in the Hanafi madhab, it's a very strong concept, and it translates into English as compatibility. And what it means is that when people get married, they should marry someone they are compatible with, on a variety of different levels, economically, socially, culturally. They need to be completely compatible. So in the old cultures, so people would marry from the same tribe, for example, right? We see this even amongst the Sahaba. Then generally the Qurayshi Sahaba would marry from amongst the Quraysh, right? And when inter-tribal marriages did take place, like when a person from Makkah marries someone from Medina, there were culture clashes that popped up. There are examples of this in our history. So what the Hanafi scholars specifically said is that when it comes to marriage, because we want to make sure a marriage works out long term, if the people getting married are from the same culture, there's a bigger chance of it working out. So this is very politically incorrect to say in our times,
Yes.
but it's actually what the books of fiqh say. Uh, Even though it's not haram, okay, so I have to word myself very carefully. It's not haram to marry to a different culture.
Correct.
It's not invalid to marry to a different culture, and it could even work out.
Mhm.
But what is recommended, what is mustahab, is to marry someone from a similar background to you, because it is more chance of it working out, right? So we see, for example, today this happens. Okay, let me give a very blunt example. Very often nowadays, when a brother who is African American and he proposes to a girl from a Desi family, and her father says no. The first reaction a lot of people have is, oh, he's being a racist, right? He's being a racist. Well, from my perspective, if he looks down upon African Americans, he is being racist. But if he has no problem with African Americans, but he is simply thinking that my daughter, I know her personality, I know her culture, I know her expectation from her husband, and it will be more likely to work out if she marries someone from the same background as her, then he's not being racist, he's just being realistic.
Mhm.
And nowadays, we have this, in every topic you have two extremes. In racism, we have two extremes. One extreme is being racist, the other extreme is calling everything racist.
Mhm.
And I believe society today is headed towards that extreme where literally everything is knocked down as racism, right? I mean, I had a problem once where I corrected someone on something they were doing that was haram, and I got accused of racism because I'm from a different race as that person. Like for me, I didn't even cross my mind. Like I'm just the guy was doing something haram in public, and I corrected him for that. But again, we can't consider everything these days racist. That's again another extreme. In Islam, there is nothing wrong. In fact, it is recommended that you marry someone who you are economically, culturally, and in other ways as well, compatible with as well. And specifically in the Hanafi madhab, the father has the right to reject a proposal from someone from a different culture if he believes that person is not compatible with his daughter, right? It's actually something that's recommended in the Hanafi madhab. And again, we're not saying those type of marriages are invalid. We're not saying they are wrong. We're not saying they are haram. We're not saying it's not going to work out. We're
Mhm.
simply saying what is recommended.
Mhm.
Right? The other side can, I mean, in my family alone, there are many cross-cultural marriages. Right? In my extended family, if you had to see us, majority of us are Indians married to Indians, but they are whites, they are Turkish, they are people from all different backgrounds as well. It's not something where we're saying that something's haram. Again, people they jump to the wrong conclusion. So if we're saying that it's better to marry someone from the same background, they're saying, oh, you're saying it's haram not to. No, we're not saying it's haram not to.
Mhm.
It's perfectly acceptable not to. We're talking about what's most likely to work out,
Yeah.
right? That's what we're looking at. What's most likely to work out. And what's most likely to work out is if two people have similar backgrounds, similar expectations, similar cultures, similar likes and dislikes, uh, similar economic levels, similar families. Because remember, when you get married, you're going to be dealing with your in-laws a lot. And if your in-laws have a radically different understanding of how family life is supposed to be, your life is going to be hell on earth, for marrying into a different culture.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people who went through that. Like I know of a sister who a lady who got married to a different culture, and she did it as an act of rebellion, saying that I'm against this racism, so I'm marrying into a different culture. Right? So she was viewing it as racism. When she got married into that culture, her mother-in-law expected her to cook for the entire extended family, breakfast, lunch, and supper every day. This includes all seven of her brother-in-laws and all of their families as well. And that's not the culture she was raised in,
No.
right? And so she suddenly finds her like, wow, what did I get myself into? I should have married within my culture. Because you don't know these things until you marry.
Yeah.
Now, for someone from that culture, they know what they're getting into. They know this is our culture. This is, what we expected to do. So this is the point that when you marry across cultures, it's not just about the individual, it's about the families as well.
Yeah.
And sometimes maybe the two individuals could make it work, but if the in-laws have a cultural expectation of a son-in-law or daughter-in-law that is very different from what you were raised with, that itself would break a marriage.
Yeah.
Right? So these are all different things people have to look at. It's not just about I'm in love with her. There's more things to look at than that.
Yeah. I mean, when a couple of years ago, I went to this was back when I was single. I went to like one of these Muslim matrimonial, interview things at the mosque, because they had advertised for it. And, like I ended up talking to a few sisters. Basically, all of them were South Asian or Desi. And every single one was like, my dad wants me to marry a Pakistani. My dad wants me to marry a Pakistani. My dad wants me to marry a Pakistani. At the end of the thing, I got so upset that I went in the back, I took a can of Pepsi and I whipped it at the wall. I was just so angry because of just like, I don't, how am I supposed to, like, it's just so quote unquote racist. But you know what, they may have a very, it might not be that even the immediate family is looking down upon this potential suitor. They might think, looking at it, the extended family may be totally against it. Like there may be serious negative repercussions. So, like now, we're a little bit older, a little bit wiser. Maybe it's a better option if converts from the same background form their own social networks and build their subcommunity from the ground up, their own third spaces. And then naturally, what will happen is that, naturally people are just attracted to, people who are familiar with them. But one of the challenges that we have, especially from converts from European backgrounds, is that not all, but some of our families, can be very anti-Islam or Islamophobic, right? So, they may push us away and say, they might kick us out of our house, they might oppress us, they might cut us out of the will, or just be, even if they don't say anything about it, they just sort of like, we just kind of feel we look really odd to them. So this makes it difficult for us to marry a convert from the same background, because, in their eyes, now it's like you're marrying into two families that don't like Muslims. So, that's the thing though. They don't, they prefer to marry someone from the same background, but at the same time, some of them keep pushing us away. My family had no problem with my conversion, alhamdulillah. But, like I've seen, in the past with these marriages that, at least the families, they get along well together. They do their own things together. And as an added bonus, if that convert, is from the same cultural background, both families and both in-laws get to see firsthand that Islam can be specifically applied to that cultural context. And they can see firsthand without us saying a word, because a lot of them just have Islam fatigue. They just don't want to hear about Islam anymore. So we're giving dawah by our actions, just by seeing, how much their son or their son-in-law, how well they're treating their daughter, or how well their daughter-in-law is treating their son, and how much their son or daughter has changed for the better. And like you said, it's not haram to marry someone from a different culture, and it's a very sensitive topic because some of these marriages do work out, and some people who are watching this are from an intercultural marriage.
Yeah, like I guess even in my own family, there are many marriages like that. It's just simply saying that, you have to look at all aspects. Again, I said different culture, I didn't say different race, because
Exactly.
from my experience, I've realized that for South African Indians, sometimes a Zulu from your same city as you is actually more closer to you in culture than from an Indian back home.
Mm-hmm.
Because we've been in South Africa for 5 generations, our culture is completely different from the Indians of India.
Yeah.
It actually has more in common with the Zulus of South Africa, right? So we'd actually be more culturally compatible with someone from that background compared to someone from back home, because our cultures have changed and evolved over time. So again, we're not talking about it from a racial perspective. We're not saying, that races have to be separated from each other or anything like that. We're simply saying that that if two people of similar backgrounds get married, it is sometimes it's more likely to work out. Again, the
Mm-hmm.
other way it can still work out, but it's starting off on a better footing, and it'll be easier for them, because remember, marriage itself is an adjustment. Now, if it's the adjustment of marriage plus the adjustment of a new culture, it's double the adjustment, and that sometimes breaks a lot of people having
Yeah,
to deal with double the adjustment.
and I hate using the word race. It's such a loaded term, and it's an English term, and
Yeah.
there's such a visceral reaction that people
Mm.
get, have to it, especially people in the Muslim
Yeah, and the
community.
term doesn't even make sense to me. I mean, historically, it never existed. Historically, Italians, French, English, German, we're all separate tribes. They
Yeah,
weren't considered white race. They were literally separate from each other. Same with Indians, Pakistanis, Bangladeshis. We were divided into different tribes: the Memons, the Surtis, the Gujaratis. It wasn't Indian as a race. This is a new term and it's a new idea, and
yeah.
it is quite problematic in our times. The issues
As
that come with it.
as a side note, how would you interpret? How would the ulama interpret the words "shu'ub" wa qaba'ila, like a nation, like in the Quran, it's translated in English as nations and tribes.
Right.
So but that encompasses the entire,
Well,
humanity.
yeah.
So
Yeah, so
how does
nations and tribes, if you're looking at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, what that would have meant is that nations would have referred to people of different lands, right? So you'd have had the Arab was like a nation, and the Byzantiums were like a nation, and the Persians were like a nation. But tribes were like more specific to that. So you had the tribes of Makkah and the tribes of Medina, and in Medina you had the Aus and the Khazraj. And these tribes had different cultures from each other. I mean, they fought wars against each other. They had very clear differences in their lifestyles. We see this with some of the cross-cultural marriages that took place in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, where culture clashes did pop up. So tribes refers to things like that, different families. That's what we will call it today, because the concept of tribe doesn't really exist in the modern world that much.
Yeah.
But it's essentially families. That's what a tribe is. So like my family is, or rather, my tribe is made up of about four different family surnames. If you had to put those four together, that's one tribe, because they all go back to a common ancestor. But that's really what tribes are referring to. It's difficult for people in the West to understand, because that the concept of lineage literally doesn't exist in America and Canada. I mean,
No.
it's like you don't have this idea.
Mhm.
But in the Muslim world, it's still there. I mean, Muslims can still trace that, this is my father, his father, all the way back to the Sahaba, or the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, or something like that. They have this concept of lineage and tribes. So that's why it's a difficult concept for us to understand in these countries, because we don't have it.
Okay. So to recap, looking at the first three generations of Muslims, intercultural marriage did occur, but it was the exception and not the rule. Would you say
Well,
that,
it
or?
depends on the land and how different the cultures were. So,
Mhm.
what happened more often? Uh, there were definitely intercultural marriages in every generation of Islam. You can see it because when Muslims moved to Malaysia, when they moved to Indonesia, when they moved to any of these lands, they were definitely intercultural marriages. But yeah, it wasn't everyone doing it either. So,
Mhm.
for example, I think one of the clearest examples of this was Islamic Spain,
Mhm.
right? The Muslims ruled over Spain for 700 years. Yet by the end of those 700 years, they were still divided into North Africans, Arabs, and whites. There
Mhm.
were still three segments of the Muslim community. It wasn't one mixed race, showing that the tribes were still preserved. Their ancestors were still preserved. They still had these distinctions that, oh, this is the Arab part of town, and this is the white part of town, and this is the African part of town, because people were still marrying within their own cultures,
Yeah.
right? So it shows that although they began to live together, they were still marrying from the same background. So the Arabs who moved uh, to Spain, some of them may have taken white wives, and we know this because the Umayyads, the later Umayyads, who ruled over Spain, were blonde-haired and blue-eyed, but they were Umayyads, so they were Arabs, but their mothers were probably white. Otherwise, how do they end up with white features? So the ruling families, I think one thing I realized, the ruling families definitely intermarried, and they
Mhm.
probably did it for political reasons,
Mhm.
because if the king has a wife from every tribe and every race and every culture, then all those tribes and cultures are suddenly like family to him, and it's going to create more bonds.
Mhm.
But for the average person, you will find that an Arab family moved to Spain, and they stayed Arab for 500, 600 years before they got kicked out of Spain, right? And
Mhm.
so it wasn't something that was the norm in every way. Rather, people still kept this issue of compatibility amongst them. And that's why we have the stories of intermarriage between the Sahaba, because it wasn't the norm.
Mhm.
In general, the Muslims of one tribe still married within the same tribe,
Mhm.
right? Because uh, like again, sometimes you mention these examples are controversial because people get too emotional. But when you study the books of history, when they explain why did the marriage of Zayd ibn Haritha and Zainab bint Jahsh not work out? Was it Zainab bint Jahsh? It was Zainab, I can't remember which Zainab, but one of the Prophet's cousins, Zainab, was married to Zayd ibn Haritha, and it never worked out. And she ended up getting divorced and marrying the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Now, the actual history books that explain why the marriage never worked out said because there was no kufuah, there was no compatibility. She was from a Qurayshi noble tribe. He was from a different tribe that had very different culture, very different background, and they used to fight every day over cultural differences,
Mhm.
right? So this is actually mentioned in many of the explanations of why the marriage never work out. And
Ah.
again, it's controversial to mention today because we're talking about the prophet's adopted son and the prophet's cousin. And, you know, to bring these issues in may sound difficult, but that
Mhm.
it's there. It's there as an example for us. We see this also a bit more of a PG-13 example. Um, the Muslims of Medina were a bit more conservative in terms of intimacy compared to the Muslims of Makkah. So when a Meccan man married a Medinan woman and he wanted to try different styles, there was uproar in the community
Ah.
because they had a culture clash on how husband and wife are intimate with each other.
I see. Okay. I think I
Get
know
what I'm
where this is
saying?
going. Yeah. No.
You understand
Continue.
what I'm getting at?
Isn't there an
So
ayah revealed
basically,
about this?
yeah, that's it. An ayah was actually revealed about it to settle the issue,
Yeah.
right? Because there was a clear culture clash here. That in one culture, people get intimate in a certain way, and in other culture, they're more experimental with their intimacy.
Nope. That's
And
true.
so a verse had to be revealed to settle it, saying that as long as certain parameters are not crossed, husband and wife can do whatever they want, right?
Yeah. I mean, I remember my not my non-Muslim friends were just like, they thought that Muslims had to be intimate between a sheet, because that's what
By the way,
they.
that culture does exist in some parts of the Muslim world.
It
It
does.
does exist. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it existed in Ireland at some point too.
Again, these are cultural things. This is not part of any religion. So what happens is somebody sees it and they assume it's part of the religion, but and cultures are different.
Yeah.
We live in maybe a more open culture, but even in Makkah, Medina itself, there were culture clashes over things like this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we can go back to G-rated examples. I mean, like even, and this is the kind of balance we have to keep, because we have to keep everything halal. But one perfect example I can give is that when we had an open house at the mosque, and we only had one table at the lobby with two brothers there, and the rules, the imam was very hard on this rule that no shaking hands between opposite genders, right? So here I'm thinking in my head, like, men and women are going to come in, the brothers are going to shake the men's hands, and the women aren't going to get a handshake. And in our culture, not getting a handshake, especially when there are gender differences, comes off as very, 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 very offensive. So I thought about this, and I talked it over with my friends, and they were in agreement with me. So we're like, how about this? We set up one table for the brothers in the lobby, and next to that, another table for two sisters. And that way, when the visitors come in, the brothers can shake the men's hands, and the women can shake the sisters' hands. So at least they're both getting a handshake. So this is the way we sort of, like, cleverly followed the sunnah, but still adapted to the culture. But the the people who are running the show it was so hard for us to convince them that this needed to be done. Like, it took hours for us to finally do this. So yeah, that's some of the culture clashes that are going to happen. But I have a few questions from some of our members. They wanted to ask specific questions about usul al-fiqh, and some of them may have already been answered.
Sure.
Let me see here. When a couple is marrying but from two different cultural communities, which urf customs are to be viewed as reigning in the home? The husbands or the wife's, or the country they are living in that is foreign to both of them?
So
Okay, question.
I really think this may depend from family to family.
Okay.
Uh, there'll be two main opinions here. Generally, the husband's culture would dominate over the wife's culture.
Mhm.
That's basically the way humanities work for the bulk of history, right? Because it's, again, Islamically, and it's not politically correct to say, but in Islam, the man is the head of the household.
Mhm.
So if the wife culture dominates, then she's the head of the household, right? So Islamically, generally, the men's culture will dominate unless, uh, you know, if the wife is from the culture of the land, then maybe her culture will be the one that he'd be expected to fit into. So, for example, if a sister growing up in New York City marries a guy from overseas, from another country, who moves to New York, he would be expected to assimilate into the New York culture. His wife shouldn't be expected to adapt to a culture that is foreign to New York. You know, so again, it's going to depend from family to family. But in general, the man's culture does dominate in the house. That's why in Islam, a man's allowed to marry a Christian or Jewish woman, but a woman's not allowed to marry a Christian or Jewish man, because in general, the man's culture is going to rule the household.
Mhm.
Right? That's why that aspect is justified from one side only.
Okay, I see. Let's see here. Um, Specifically, since culture does change over time, how exactly is urf allowed to change when the society has ruled on permissibility or harmlessness at one point, but progressing to a different societal norm that is more relaxed? Let's see here. Okay, this one's probably a little bit easier to answer. How much
Yeah, but that's actually an
resistance?
important one. I
Yeah, go
actually
ahead.
don't mind answering that one.
No, go
Yeah.
ahead. Go ahead.
There's actually a question that comes up a lot in Usul al-Fiqh. So the principle that the of fiqh that applies here is that the change to law must happen. The change of law with the times cannot be denied. This is actually a principle in fiqh. The change of laws with the times cannot be denied. Now, what happens? The area that's controversial is that intermediate period, right? For example, let me give you an example. Uh, just say that it is the culture of a land. Um, Let me try and make up like a really weird example so nobody gets offended with something real, right? Uh, okay, just say it's the culture of a land that men have to walk around bare chested, right? So people can see how strong and fit and brave they are. And 3 generations later, it's the culture of the land that men have to wear a shirt, right? What happens to the generation in between?
Mm.
So this is what actually happens in real life, is that you will have a generation that says it is haram to do X, Y, Z. In between, you're going to have a generation where half the ulama are saying it's haram and the other half are saying no, it's not haram. And they're going to fight with each other, and there's going to be clashes, and there's going to be people on both sides. And then a generation later, everyone's saying it's halal.
Mm.
Okay, let me give you a real example of this. Videos, right? When we were kids, videoing was haram, right? This camera was called the eye of Dajjal.
Oh.
Yeah, video was haram. When we started teaching Islam, half of us were saying video is haram, the other half is saying video is halal. Today, barely anyone says it's haram.
Mm-hmm.
It's like such a normal, dominant part of every culture. The idea of you telling a young person today to use a video camera is haram is like, yeah, what are you talking about? How
Mm.
could it possibly be haram? Because the culture has changed so much over the years. And I actually get people asking me this. My uncles always tell me, so when we were kids, they used to tell us videos are haram, but now we have Islamic TV channels. What happened? And I tell them the culture changed. That's what happened. As simple as that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, and sometimes, there are political motivations behind why some countries don't implement certain things because they think that it's being influenced from outside. I don't want to get into details because we don't want to make this video has already been controversial enough. So I think
Yeah.
we'll put it to rest for now. So I don't know. This is a very fruitful discussion, Brother Ismail. Is there anything else you would like to add in terms of what we've covered so far, or did you have any questions for me specifically?
No, I actually wanted to know if there are any other questions there. I don't mind taking 1 or 2 more questions before we close out. I think you
Sure,
did
no
have another
problem.
question
Let's
because I'd
see.
rather cover whatever we can.
Okay. Um, mm, no, I think these are on a kind of already been answered.
Okay.
I'm just trying to exhaust all information here. It's good. We're at the hour-and-a-half mark, but let's just see. Hmm. So, okay. I just want to give a few like examples from real life. I remember one time we went to an Eid prayer. I was outside in Toronto, and it was run by a mosque that was basically run by the Somali community. And most, like I would say, it's 60 to 70% of the congregants for the Eid prayer were, Somali. And just 2 blocks north of us was another mosque who had set aside another area that was mostly Desi, and they had their own Eid prayer going at the same time. And the Somali imam, he got very upset. He's just like, why aren't we, together and just having all one Eid prayer? Like, why aren't they coming over here and having our Eid prayer? And in my head, me and my friend, who was, North African, we kind of were just like, I don't see a problem. I think a better idea or a better option would just be say, how about this? At the end of the Eid prayer, why don't we walk over to our Desi brothers and wish them an Eid Mubarak and, shake their hand and give them a hug, just to show the unity through diversity of the Muslim community. And, I think the quintessential example we always use is that even the tribe of Al Aus and Al Khazraj, even they had their own battle flags when
Mm.
they fought in the, I'm not sure which battles in which they had this, but can we infer from that specific example from the Sirah that the Aus and the Khazraj, they had their own flags to identify, that these uh, we were both Muslim, we were both tribes, we were both united, cemented as one block. But at the same time, that shows our strength because, all these tribes are basically united. So I think there's a fear with some Muslims in that implementing this to converts and then them having their own quote unquote sub community would be quote unquote division, but it really isn't division. It's sort of unity through diversity. How would you describe it as that, Ismail?
Yeah, so like it takes me back to like when I was younger. We had an issue that popped up in my community was uh, some of the Zulu converts to Islam were starting to sing Islamic songs in Zulu and in Xhosa and in these languages, and people were like, "You are imitating the kuffar, and you're singing like the kafirs. You're only supposed to sing like this." And they would play some Urdu Bollywood style song, saying, "This is allowed because this is our this is our religion." And there was a huge uproar when someone got on stage at an event and sang an entire Islamic song in Zulu. Fast forward 20 years, it's normal.
Hmm.
It's normal at every Islamic event that you're going to get songs in every local language about Islam because no people don't see it anymore as an issue. So these clashes are going to happen in the beginning, uh, but how did those Zulu songs grow? They formed their own communities. They got together. They're like, hey, let's write a song for our people. So what the way they looked at it is that their tribes love music, so we can get the message of Islam across to them in their language. Let's write a song about Islam in their language,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so this developed an entire new subgenre of Zulu Islamic songs. Right? This exists in our country. We have like a whole genre of Zulu Islamic songs, the Xhosa Islamic songs,
Oh wow.
because this is a way of the message reaching people in those communities.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it begins when guys from the same background get together, having coffee together, and coming up with ideas of getting Islam into their communities, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to be able to think better than someone from outside. I wouldn't think about it because I'm from a different background, right? So that idea wouldn't cross my mind. But when they together, they can come up with ways to spread Islam better amongst their people because they know the community. They know their people love music, so Islamic songs was the way,
Yeah.
right? So that's one of the benefits of this. And again, I don't see that the issue at all. I mean, in South Africa, it's normal. In South Africa, it's normal to see a group of Muslims hanging out, sometimes with the different races, sometimes just with their race or just their family, or just nobody makes any of these things an issue because we all know each other as Muslim brothers. We all greet each other. We all love each other. It's
Mm.
just a matter of hanging around people who share the same interests as you and the same goals as you. That's what
Yeah.
it really boils down to. And
And you
people
know what?
shouldn't take that personally.
Yeah, exactly. And you know what?
Yeah.
And I want to reach out to, like the older born Muslim community and the aunties and uncles and because you said there's this struggle in, trying to have their kids keep their culture.
Mm.
I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, like, and I'm focusing a lot on the youth because, like in high school, there are only a few Muslims when I went to high school, but now it's become a commonplace that there's, like a Muslim minority in each high school in Canada. So you know what, they're trying to fit in, they're trying to adopt Western values, and they're really caught in the middle. And I don't know exactly what that experience is like, but I honestly, I want, Muslims from to keep that aspects of their background, whether that be cuisine or culture. And the way to get around the idea of making it compatible to
Mm.
Western society is, like when people are interested in Islam, let the converts adapt their own culture
Yeah.
and band together, and that in
Do
that
what
way,
we did.
yeah,
Just do what we did in South Africa.
yeah,
In South Africa, if you go to the average restaurant, a halal restaurant, you're going to find Turkish food, Indian food, Pakistani food, South African food, Italian food, Portuguese food,
mm,
Mexican food, all halal, all in one place, and we eat all those. When it comes to food and cuisine, we're not about preserving one culture. We enjoy every culture,
mm-hmm,
right? And so in those areas, there's what's going to happen is going to be not a giving up of a culture, but an amalgamation of cultures.
mm-hmm,
So, for example, the way we cook in South Africa, some of our dishes have their origins in India, but they have been South Africanized. They have been edited to fit in with the South African cuisine.
mm-hmm.
So that's what's going to happen there as well. So you're going to have people who are making Indian food, but there might be an American twist to it. You
Yeah,
know, so maybe instead of a chicken tikka, they make a turkey tikka or something like that.
yeah.
Something like that. It's just adding those twists, and that's how the cultures come together naturally. So yeah, inshallah, I agree with you. It's actually good that the parents are worried because it shows they're concerned about their children.
Mm,
They don't want the children to adopt the negative aspects of the culture. But from my experience in my community, when parents get too extreme with this, the kids run off in the opposite direction. In my community, feminism and liberalism came from those families where the parents were strict on things that Islam is not strict about. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like how I said the Islamic dressing for men. You know,
Mm-hmm.
things like this. When the families were strict about things that Islam is not strict about, the kids ran away in the opposite direction and
Mm-hmm.
essentially left Islam.
Yeah.
So the more balanced way would be to find a way forward. Okay, listen, my culture is different from my child's culture. Let's find a way to help them see, take the good of their culture and leave the bad.
Mm-hmm.
One of the ways I do that is with the younger people, I explain to them why. You know, okay, so everyone around you is fornicating. Why is fornication prohibited in Islam? You know, this nowadays you have to discuss the whys. You can't just tell them it's haram, don't get a girlfriend. You have to explain to them why. You have to show them, okay, there's the stakes of heartbreak and depression and suicide and sexually transmitted diseases and all these things because they need to understand why. So yeah, it's good that the parents are concerned, but my worry is if you're going to be too strict on what Islam is not strict about, your kids are going to fly in the opposite direction. So it's important for the parents to get educated and to know what they should stay strict on, like don't drink, don't take drugs, don't fornicate, and where you can have some leeway. Like, okay, you want to have a birthday party? Let's see what we can do about that.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
that's
in my experience, I mean, like growing up, in my non-Muslim, mostly white society, like a Muslim who drinks and smokes and does all these haram things, they don't look up to them. They see him as a sellout.
yeah,
I mean, they look up to, they look up to Muslims who stick to their values. So it's better, to like be like a Muslim who sticks to their guns, and really, I mean, like even the people who have the most negative, opinion of Muslims in general, or have a lot of fears about Muslims, they still look up to, Muslims who aren't drinking and are, sticking to their values and being a traditional family, and things like that. I mean, like, even someone from my work, she has a lot of fears about Islam, but she is a huge fan of Muhammad Ali, and and that's why I think, on the surface it appears that they want to fit in, but in the long run, even in the short run, it's better to stick to your Islamic values.
yeah, yeah.
um,
I think across all cultures, one thing that's common is that people respect integrity.
mhm,
And they respect someone who has integrity towards their values, even if their values are different.
mhm.
So, I mean, when a Muslim doesn't practice Islam, uh, even people who are Islamophobic won't take what they say about Islam seriously. That's that, because you can see through that this guy doesn't represent what he's talking about.
Right. Exactly. So, yeah, I mean, that's the best thing that they can do. And like I know a lot of people who used to not like Muslims, or who had a lot of fears about Muslims, but once they interacted with them either at work, or like they got their oil changed at the Muslim mechanic, their opinion completely can changed around, because they saw that they were honest, they saw that they were hardworking, and like they looked up to them. So like, and I guess people, many born Muslims, don't see the effects of that firsthand, because they don't really talk to them or converse with them, but they do with me. And
Hmm.
they tell me, like, I used to not like Muslims, but after, like, I talk to them, like, like, I changed my opinion about them.
Yeah,
So,
and that's really the importance of just. I always tell people the best way to do dawah is to just live Islam.
mhm.
Because if you are a role model of the lifestyle of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then people are going to fall in love with that, and they want to have that for themselves as well.
Mhm.
So that just people see Islam in us, and they will love Islam. But of course, people to see Islam in us, we ourselves need to be educated enough to know the difference between Islam and culture.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's the missing piece. I mean, these are all wonderful things, and I think the Dawa efforts in the West have really concentrated on these important aspects. I think the big missing piece is that Westerners think that they're going to find it unpalatable or too huge of a jump to convert to Islam publicly, and then their family is going to react negatively to it. They're going to lose a lot of friends and family, and they're coming into another community where the culture is completely different.
Hmm.
So if there is that safety net that's there, you're going to see, like the status of Muslims, not just for converts, but for the whole Muslim community, improve in the long run and the short run. Really.
Yeah, inshallah, inshallah.
So,
So really, for me, the one message I always promote to everyone, and I think I'll end off with this, is gradual change is the best change.
mhm,
Don't try to force change on people. Don't try to change things overnight. Uh, it you do things in a way that's going to naturally move people in the right direction.
mhm,
When I was younger, I was very much hardcore about changing everything. Like I would literally go online or go in public and tell people, do this and don't do that, or these people are wrong, and it didn't change anything. All it did is maybe get me in trouble,
mhm.
right? A lot of trouble. But getting wiser, I learned, that's not the way it works. So, for example, let me give you a practical example. When I was growing up, everyone thought that the South Asian dressing is Islamic dressing.
Mhm.
And I myself used to dress like that because people wouldn't take me seriously if I didn't. In my 30s, I stopped dressing like that, right? Nothing had changed except I had stopped dressing like that. Guess what happened when I stopped dressing like that? Over the past 5 years, more and more people of knowledge and teachers stopped dressing like that.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I didn't change the people through fighting with them or arguing with them or picking on them. I just led by example. Let people see that someone can have knowledge of Islam and not be just like it's from India. Let people see that this is possible. And you can still be a practicing Muslim without dressing like that. Let them just see it. And if people see it, over time they'll get used to it. And when people get used to it, the culture changes. I'm doing the same thing right now with the Jummah khutbah. So in South Africa, there's the idea that the Jummah khutbah has to be in Arabic.
Mm.
And every masjid, it's in Arabic, except mine, where I have it in English.
Hmm.
Right? So this is again a change where I'm not telling anyone else what to do. I'm not telling other masjids what to do. I'm not telling people they are wrong. I'm just doing it differently and leading by example. And this way, we gradually change people in a way that's better, without fighting, without arguing, without alienating anyone. I think
Yeah.
that's probably the best way forward, inshallah.
Well, one last example, and I guess this is kind of too little, too late, but I'm thinking about architecture, because if you look at mosques, say in China, they look
Mm,
like pagodas. They don't look
yeah.
like mosques. I mean, and some of them have just stayed that way for centuries. Islamically, there, as far as I know, there is no regulations on what a mosque is supposed to look like. The minaret, I believe, was adapted in the 9th century as an Islamic marker.
Mm,
But what we see is that there's a whole, I think, part of the reasons why there's such an antipathy toward Islam is that it's seen as a culturally
different.
like, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, or like an
So
invasion. You can
an
say it's like an
invasion.
invasion to see a different type of building in your
So
community.
the Switzerland, they had all these laws a couple of years ago, on trying to get rid of minarets, or like limiting the number of minarets. But really, there is no restrictions on that. And like a lot of, if you look all across the Muslim world, a lot of these mosques are based on the local architecture.
Yeah, yeah. In
Um,
South Africa, we have that as well. So I can tell you a personal story. 3 months ago, at one of the newest mosques that we built in Durban, we had the open day for non-Muslims, right?
mhm,
And the first lady to show up, or she was a white lady, and she showed up, and I asked her, what attracted you to come and speak to us, and she told me it's the architecture.
mm,
Right, that's it. She said that you built such a stunningly beautiful building in this area. I had to come and see what it's about. And really, the architecture of that mosque is absolutely stunning. Like I myself walked in, I was like, wow, this is a beautiful piece of art.
mm,
And so, we have this with our mosque. It's a way to express ourselves creatively. There is no one way of building a mosque, right? It's a place to pray. It can reflect any culture. It can reflect any artist. This is our art.
mm,
So in South Africa, you will find every type of mosque. There are mosques that look traditional with the green dome and the minaret, and there are others that literally just look like houses, like
mm,
it is a square block with a room inside it. And
yeah,
there are others that are absolutely unique, like you haven't seen a building like it before because the artist who designed it, the architect who designed it, just used his imagination.
yeah,
And in this way, what people need to understand is a masjid is a masjid based on your intention, that the person building it intended it to devote it to the worship of Allah. There's nothing in the Quran or Hadith said it needs to be designed this way or that way or have a specific look. That's really an area where Allah has left us to have full creativity and do as we wish, as long as it's halal.
Yep. No, I totally agree with you. I guess the challenge is trying to convince people that it's that it doesn't have to look a certain way. And just to
Yeah.
add a practical example, you mentioned mosques in South Africa and such. One practical example I like to give in Dearborn, Michigan, there was a mosque that was made out of an old abandoned bowling alley.
Okay.
So I don't know. I think they kept a couple of lanes too for people to play bowling, but yeah, they just turned a bowling alley into a mosque. So I guess it's more.
Yeah, in South Africa, almost every mall and airport has its own salah area, like a
Oh,
Muslim
really?
designated salah area with Jummah prayers and everything.
Mhm.
Like literally any mall you go to or airport you go to, you will find salah areas and people praying Jummah and people praying a congregation, and it's just for Muslims. So it's not shaped like a mosque. It's just a room with the prayer rugs made out and place for wudu.
If you can find those any YouTube videos, or if you can send me the videos of those Zulu nasheeds,
Yeah,
we'd love to hear it. We can send you the YouTube video. There's a couple of Icelandic converts who created an Icelandic nasheed about the death of Abu Lahab that I can send
sounds
you.
interesting.
Yeah. It sounds like Bjork. It's sung in the traditional Icelandic saga style, and I think there's a well-known British convert who had a British style nasheed that sounds like it's from like medieval England.
Wow.
But no, I guess we'll end it at that. Thank you so much for the discussion today, Brother Ismail. It was very informative. And let's keep in touch. If you have any books to recommend that we can read, that lay people can read about culture and urf,
Mm.
if they exist, or if there's something, maybe we can get a bilingual person to translate some of the books that you referenced from Arabic and
Yeah, so I'm
English.
actually working on a book on this topic. One
Oh,
of the books I'm writing is called How Fiqh Works,
okay.
because
Well,
I realize how people need that.
no, absolutely. And once you do
Yeah.
get it published, we will definitely advertise for you, so we can help get the word out. But
Inshallah.
yeah, that's pretty much about it. Yeah, so I guess we'll end it here. Did you have any other closing comments, Ismail? Or
So my only closing comments would be for the listeners is, when it comes to these kind of discussions, let's number one have husnul dhan, assume the best of each other. Don't think that the person having discussion is someone evil or someone trying to change the religion, or again, we are all Muslims who love Allah and love His message, the Messenger of and we want to practice Islam. Just because we have different understandings of Islam doesn't mean that someone's a bad guy, right? And so, number one, let's have good thoughts about it. And number two, let's educate ourselves, right? So don't just make assumptions that Islam is the way I think it is. Read books, attend lectures, attend classes, build your knowledge, because you will find the more knowledge you have, the more you realize that half of your assumptions about Islam were wrong. And I'm saying this to born Muslims,
Mhm.
right? Because I've seen this firsthand. So many times people walk up to me and they say, "What you're doing is haram." And when I actually open the Quran or the Hadith or book of Usul al-Fiqh and explain to them what I'm doing, they realize that, whoa, what I'm doing is fine. What they were saying is wrong, right? So education is so important. And nowadays, there's no excuse not to educate yourself because we have the internet. We
Mhm.
have things available all over the world. So let us do this. Let us educate. Let us, if you hear someone saying an opinion different from what we know to be or what we were raised upon, our first assumption shouldn't be that this person's a deviant or this person's a liberal or this person's an extremist. Our first opinion should be that maybe he learned something I didn't. Let me contact the guy and get more clarification before we jump to conclusions and bash each other on Facebook and make 4-hour videos refuting each other. Let's actually have conversations. That's the best way forward.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, culture changes are going to happen, and we are in the middle of one at the moment. And I know a lot of people are very tense about it, but if we have these conversations, we can guide it in the right direction. If we
Mhm.
don't have these conversations, then the culture change is going to be more radical, and the haram elements are going to come in, and we're going to wish we had the conversation and guided it towards the halal.
Yeah.
So you can't stop the change of culture, but you can guide it in the direction that is righteous. So
Mhm.
let us work on that instead. And with that, yeah, I think we can close off, inshallah.
Inshallah. Thank you so much for having us, for coming on today, Brother Ismail.
It was a pleasure. Definitely a
Yeah,
pleasure.
absolutely. Alhamdulillah. We'll keep in contact. But
Yep.
yeah, and thank you so much. And we'll sign off from there. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Okay.